everybody. Happy Monday and happy Earth Day. A very exciting day around the world and especially here in the US of A. I am so glad to be back on the stream with you guys and talking about something positive today on the stream because I don't know about you, but the last few days have just been the biggest shit show I could have possibly imagined with American politics. In case you haven't been keeping up with all of the things, or maybe you were distracted by the imminent threat of World War III, or Joe Biden forgetting his name again, or all of the things, the government hates you and are doing absolutely everything they can to prove said hatred to you. On last Friday, the government did a backdoor rewrite of Title IX to essentially eviscerate women's equality in education. We love to see it. So men can use women's bathrooms in educational settings now. Men can live in women's dorm rooms. Men can take women's scholarships and academic enrollment opportunities. The whole nine. Oh yeah, and men who get accused of things like SA now really don't have to prove that it didn't happen. You're just guilty if 51% of the evidence points you towards that. We made some reels about it. Go watch on Instagram if you need some more context. And then over the weekend, the House of Representatives overwhelmingly decided to give literally dozens of billions of dollars of your money to Ukraine and Taiwan and the Middle East, all while conveniently voting to ban TikTok at the same time. So it's all working its way through the Senate now. But thanks, Joe Biden, for literally destroying my happiness over the weekend. But today is Earth Day. I'm going to spend some time outside this afternoon after the stream. We're having a good day, come hell or high water. Joe Biden can take a lot from me, but he's not going to take our spirit. And he's not going to take our laughter, okay? We are live across platforms this Monday on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Locals, Getter, and Instagram. And I am super excited for the stream today because we are actually going to be replaying an interview that we played on the stream last week. Unfortunately, if you guys remember, I was in Missouri speaking at Mizzou with their Students for Life chapter last Tuesday. Was that already almost a week ago? And we had absolutely garbage campus and hotel Wi-Fi that kept cutting the stream in and out, and unfortunately didn't get to deliver the punchy message that we really wanted to deliver, pause for dramatic effect, because my dear friend Benji Backer has a new book, The Conservative Environmentalist, Common Sense Solutions for a Sustainable Future, out on shelves now. I have been friends with Benji for a very long time, and it is an honor to see his book hit shelves and really make an impact for every generation, but especially young Americans who have bought into this lie for so long that in order to support the environment, in order to call yourself a conservationist or an environmentalist, you have to automatically be a leftist. And at that, you have to automatically be a screaming, having a temper tantrum, throwing cans of soup at paintings in a museum leftist. Benji is the founder of an organization that I see in our Instagram chat. We love it, called ACC, the American Conservation Coalition. And I have been incredibly fortunate to do a lot of work with them over the last couple of years. They are really the only right of center organization that exists talking about environmental issues like developing new energy sources, what's going on in agriculture, public lands and the National Park Service, good forest management, and more. And it has been the honor of a lifetime as his friend watching Benji really shake things up in the American political space. His new book became a bestseller in a matter of hours. He's been on The View and every single outlet you can possibly imagine since his book came out last week. And since our crappy campus Wi-Fi, sorry Mizzou, we got to throw you under the bus. You have very crappy campus Wi-Fi. Kept cutting out our interview last week, and you guys didn't get to see all of the amazing things that Benji says and that he talks about in his new book. We are going to replay that interview for you guys today on the stream. But first, I want to say hi to you guys, and as you guys are letting us know who you are and where you're watching from in our live chat today, do me a huge favor and smash that follow or sub button if you haven't already. And in the next browser over, go to your browser tab and type in publicsquare.com. One word, Public Square. It is America's largest and fastest growing marketplace of more than 75,000 businesses that are all pro-family, pro-freedom, and pro-faith. You know you will always be supporting a business that shares your values when you shop through Public Square. And if you are a business owner of any kind, you guys need to be on Public Square as well. So many of you guys say that you have added your businesses to the platform, and we love them because they make everything we do around here for the stream every day 100% possible. I've also been told through a little birdie that they may be launching some sort of book situation on Public Square. So whether you're trying to snag a copy of my book, The End of the Alphabet, of Benji's book, The Conservative Environmentalist, or wanting to support any of your other favorite authors, the more that you guys go to Public Square and keep supporting them, the more amazing features that they will be able to unlock. Let's start over on Instagram today. Hello, shout out to the amazing team over at ACC, American Conservation Coalition. Who else is watching? Beer Boy is watching in Tennessee. I salute you, Beer Boy. Thank you for being here. We've got Madman watching in New York City. Raina is watching in Ohio, Georgia, Sweden. Communist Oregon says, hey, 1990. Hang in there, buddy. It's going to be okay. Nebraska, we've got Phoenix, Arizona watching. India is tuning in. We've got Rossum watching in Texas. Juan Jose is in Colombia. My mom's favorite movie. Fun trivia fact about Isabel Brown. My mom's absolute diehard favorite movie that she will go to the grave quoting at least 7 times a day is a movie called Romancing the Stone. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this movie, but it takes place in Colombia. And she thinks that she's like this amazing international explorer when she watches it. Shout out, Mom. Is this the bus to Cartagena? Juan Jose, thank you for watching. Mitchell's watching in Ontario. Jonathan's watching in Zimbabwe, one of my favorite countries around the world. We've got Canada, Italy, Kentucky, Nicaragua, Australia, UK, Israel, Kansas, Mexico, Florida, London, and more, all watching over on Instagram. So glad that you guys are here. Jim is watching on Rumble, so is Hottie3G and Farmer Caleb. Over on Locals, we've got Carolyn, Alex, M-Rock, Nitty Witty, and more. And finally, over on YouTube, Svelter, 1950, Dawn, Delane Thomas, Amy, Rick, and more are all kicking things off for us in our chat. You guys are here in full force for a Monday afternoon, and I am very, very grateful for you being here on the stream. Before I play this interview that we actually recorded last week with our amazing friend Benji Backer for his new book, I just want to set the stage for you on this Earth Day, why I think this topic is so, so important. I've been incredibly outspoken about being an environmentalist, being a conservationist throughout all of my political commentary career, for what that's worth, in the last 5 to 6 years in my 20s. And for me, it's never been a partisan political issue whatsoever to support the environment. I think most people in our generation feel the exact same way, that you don't have to support the AOCs of the world or her disastrous policies like the Green New Deal, which we'll get into with Benji, in order to care about the environment. You don't have to drive an electric vehicle per se. You don't have to be a vegan. In fact, sometimes that hurts the environment more than it helps it. Fun fact. But you can just be a human being who loves this earth and feels a responsibility to care for it in order to call yourself a conservationist or an environmentalist. And for whatever reason, in recent American history, the entire narrative around environmentalism, around green concepts and green ideas, around sustainable energy sources, around agriculture, around everything, is that you have to be an overwhelming leftist in order to care, period, full stop. Basically, you need to be Greta Thunberg reincarnated. You need to support the Green New Deal. You need to only drive an electric car. You need to compost all of your food, etc., and support a socialistic government takeover of everything in order to save the planet's imminent demise within the next 12 years. In order to even say you care. And the amazing thing is, the more research I've done into this topic over the last several years, the more I've realized not only is that just ridiculous and not true for the time that we live in now, but that's not representative of the history of conservation in the United States of America. In fact, throughout all of American history, it's regularly been conservatives politically who are leading the charge for conservation in our country. It was Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president in American history, to set aside the first public land ever in our country through signing the Yosemite Grant Act and setting aside the Yosemite Valley that would later become the beautiful, beautiful Yosemite National Park as the first public land in America. It was Teddy Roosevelt, who many would call the conservationist president, a political conservative, who essentially came up with the concept of the National Park Service. And you're welcome, rest of the world, because none of you would have national parks if it wasn't for the American National Park Service. It was Richard Nixon, believe it or not, like him or hate him, and like the agency or hate the agency. It was Richard Nixon who created the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, and even more recently, it was Donald Trump who invested the largest single investment back into our public lands and National Park Service with the Great American Outdoors Act. He was championing something called the Trillion Trees Initiative during his presidency, and you would never hear any of that, not a peep of that, from the mainstream media. And of course, even outside of politics and specifically positions in the presidential position of power in America, it's conservatives on a day-to-day basis that are living out the ethos of conservation itself. People who like to hunt and fish, people running independent farms and ranches, people who care about the earth, who are good stewards of it and trying to pass it on to the next generation, are in fact the real conservationists, not people who block the Brooklyn Bridge and stall traffic to create more carbon emissions, which has never made sense to me, or who throw paint and cans of soup and mashed potatoes at things in art museums to try to get people's attention, but people who actually walk the walk. And maybe the best example of the person who walks the walk in conserving things from a conservative perspective in environmentalism today is my amazing friend, Benji Backer. So as not to steal the show from him, as he tells you about his new book, The Conservative Environmentalist, right now, we're going to switch gears and play for you this interview that we recorded last week for Benji whilst on the road. Please join me in welcoming the incredible, the amazing, the inspiring Benji Backer back to the stream. Benji, I'm so excited to have you back on the live stream. It's been a while since you've been on the stream, but you are an old friend to me and all of my content. And it is a very, very special day for you as you are calling in from New York City for the launch of your new book, The Conservative Environmentalist. I've already started reading it on the plane today, and it is such an amazing read. Can you just give people who might be watching that might not be familiar to you and your work a little overview into who Benji is and what your new book is all about?
Well, thanks, Isabel. I mean, you have been such an inspiration in the way that you've kind of scaled the impact of your work. And I mean, now we're author buddies. Finally, we've been ski buddies and hiking buddies and grabbing a beer together buddies, but now it's time to be author buddies too. And I mean, look, I've been active in conservative politics for 16 years of my 26-year life, and you know, we're similar age, and we know that our peers care a lot about the environment. We care a lot about the environment. We grew up in a time where our schools were telling us that climate change was an existential threat, and everything on social media has told us that too. And of course, I care about the environment. And so as someone who had a 16-year run in conservative politics so far, I felt for a while that my views of conservatism were at odds with the environment. I always had to qualify that I was a conservative on everything but the environment. And then I realized in starting this organization, ACC, and what I outline in the book, that there's actually a conservative approach to this that is good for humanity, that is good for our economy, that is good for our country, and that doesn't take people's lives away, that doesn't force us to do things we don't want to do and force us to make changes that the government says are good but that we don't think are good. There's an approach, but no one had talked about that until this book came out today. And there has never been a book written by a conservative about the environment in our lifetimes. And yet we're the ones who led on these issues for so long as conservatives, with Teddy Roosevelt, Richard Nixon, and so many other Republican leaders that have been such incredible icons. We've just forgotten that, and it's time to return to that legacy.
Oh my gosh, love that overview so much. And I've been really, really outspoken about this issue in particular, especially the history of conservation over the last couple of months. We just did a live stream the other day after the event with ACC that I did with the Schwarzenegger Foundation in Los Angeles. And I was trying really hard to remind people, look, conservation and caring for the environment is not inherently a left-wing value. It's actually, historically, in America at least, been a championing position of the right. It was conservative presidents that set aside the First first public land, that paved the way for the National Park Service, that started the Environmental Protection Agency. And I think for so long, especially our generation, was just unaware of that reality, especially how it was presented in the education system. Like growing up in the reduce, reuse, recycle era was like
Right.
hippie greenies and go hug
Yep.
a tree kind of
Yep.
thing. And not that there's anything wrong with that.
No.
And you and I both growing up in the mountains and surrounded by that type of mentality, I think fueled into that. But why do you think the left was so hell-bent on creating this narrative that you had to be a leftist if you cared about the environment?
Because they win elections off of it, and that's really what it is. I mean, you think about, and I talk about this in the book early on because I think it's important to set the stage for why this issue got so divisive. Al Gore became the poster child of environmentalism in the early 2000s. That's like having Donald Trump be the poster child of something and then expecting the Democrats to get on board. Like, that's not going to happen. If you're confused about why Republicans won't get on board, but yet you're championing it as an electoral issue, like Al Gore turned it from being, hey, we're working across the aisle to work on environmental issues, and that was totally the history of environmentalism. It was not like, it's not kumbaya to say that. That is actually what it was. He turned it into the right is the enemy, fossil fuels are the enemy,
Yep.
and anybody that's working in rural America really is the enemy. And so everyone on the right was like, well, I don't buy into that. And I don't believe that I'm the enemy. And actually, I love the environment. And you're going to vilify me for spending my life powering you, providing the resources for you, giving the food for your tables, giving you the oil and gas that you use for your car. And you're going to tell me that I'm the enemy. I'm running the other way. And so I think both sides are to blame for where we are today, absolutely. But I do think, contrary to what anyone wants me to say, that Al Gore and the left started the partisanship on this, and the right, unfortunately, didn't come up with their own positions instead.
That's fascinating. Almost just giving up the battle instead of continuing
Yes.
to demand a seat at the table. And really, I think that's the first step in this conversation about environmentalism that our generation is having now to reclaim. Outside of the American Conservation Coalition, there hasn't been a whole lot traditionally
No.
in the world of conservative activism politics to reframe this issue, to make it a conservative issue, to embrace conservation and environmentalism. You have dedicated your whole career to this, but also it's the first chapter of your new book, The Conservative Environmentalist, that we have to bridge this political divide and change the narrative. How do you think that young conservatives can effectively do that to reclaim this issue going into the November election?
Well, I think it's time that we say that the environmental movement of the left isn't working, and it's our turn to be the solution makers. We want fossil fuels to be cleaner and more efficient, but we don't want them to go away. We want nuclear energy. We want renewables. We want all of it. We want our leaders to prioritize solutions that'll work for rural communities. We want farmers and ranchers in America to be supported. We want the future of our economy to be strong. We don't want the government telling us what to do. We want to be equipped with good resources and good solutions that are technology and innovation based, not regulation based. I mean, this is honestly pretty straightforward. We just got to take the narrative back. And by the way, it will provide so much of a better outcome for our environment. But we need our Republican elected officials to hear that. And I think my book does a good job of kind of going through issue by issue what those solutions look like and what the trade-offs are of each one, so that what we can push for actually makes a difference. We need to push for simple things like forest management so that we prevent all these horrible wildfires that have been happening across the United States and across North America. We need to keep our nuclear plants open that Democrat governors are trying to shut down. We need to keep natural gas plants open in the United States, because if we're not doing it here, another country's doing it way dirtier and way more inhumane than we are. Like, it's very, very simple. It's just we need to create a new environmental movement. So it's simple, but it's difficult, right? Because you have to create a new environmental movement. But that's how we take the narrative back. And we need to also make sure that our leaders prioritize this. This can't be the 10th or 15th issue that they talk about. I'm not asking for it to be the top issue that people talk about on the right, but it's got to be near the top 5, because otherwise we're going to continue ceding this issue to the left, to people who are proposing ideas like the Green New Deal, which, if it was effective, 100% effective, it would reduce emissions worldwide by 4% for the cost of $93 trillion. We need to improve our environment, but we cannot be going in that direction, and we can steer a different one.
Before we dive into some more nuanced issues there, I think that's a wonderful place to just kick this conversation off then. We don't talk about it. There's very little conversation, especially in conservative politics, about the environment or any social issue, period. It's something that's been really frustrating for me as I try to get more people to talk about abortion and the gender theory movement that's happening in America and all of these social plaguing contagions that are taking over society. I think people are aware that environmentalism is important for young people, but immediately they just look at it as people throwing, cans of soup at multi-zillion-dollar priceless paintings in museums or locking down interstates and bridges in order to throw an absolute temper tantrum for the environment. I don't know where we can create the first most effective step in helping those older than us who are in positions of power start a more productive conversation here. If you were talking to a member of Congress or a presidential candidate, what's the first thing you would encourage them to address in order to make this a primary issue of conservatism moving forward?
I would just say show that this issue doesn't have to fall within the narrative of blocking traffic and throwing soup at paintings. Like, just because that side is crazy doesn't mean that there aren't real problems and that there aren't solutions that, are reasonable. Like, thankfully, the people who are being that radical are a small percentage of the population. And because they're radical, they have a huge part of the narrative and, unfortunately, garner most of our time on the issue. So I think it's mostly showing that we have solutions that are reasonable and that help people out and that are inherently conservative in their values. Like, there's nothing anti-conservative about being pro-environment. That needs to be like point number one. And that conservation, clean water, clean air, reducing pollution in our atmosphere, protecting our ecosystems are very conservative principles. So that's point number one. And then point number two would be, if we do not take action on environmental progress, we are really, really risking the future of our country from an economic perspective. The push for clean energy, the push for clean, sustainable solutions is a multi-trillion-dollar effort over the next couple of decades in terms of our global economic output that's being put towards it. So if we're not manufacturing electric vehicle batteries here, making hybrids, or building nuclear, or investing in geothermal, all these kind of different things that we could do, they're going to be done somewhere else. And right now that's happening in China and Russia. And so not only is it not anti-conservative to be pro-environment, it's actually, if you're not engaging on the issue, it's anti-American, because you are really risking the future of this country. And in a world where do we want to live in a world where China is controlling 90+% of our supply for minerals, for solar panels and electric vehicle batteries? Do we want a world where over 99% of our uranium fuel for nuclear reactors comes from other countries like Russia? That's not a world that we want to live in. They cut that off, and that's our energy source. So we have an obligation as conservatives to lead on this.
You brought up a minute ago some examples of leftist environmental policy gone bad, even if it's shrouded in good intentions. And I think forest management is maybe the best example of that. I grew up in Colorado, where wildfires are a very annual occurrence. It's wildfire season. You can expect one to be in your hometown. California has experienced absolutely disastrous wildfires over the last several years. How is that policy example a good indicator of where the left is really leading our country in the wrong direction, even though it's having this facade of good intentions?
Yeah, it's actually a great point, because in California, they used to manage their forests super well. I mean, wildfires, to your point, are going to happen. They happened before humans were here, and they're going to happen after humans are gone. The question isn't whether or not there are going to be wildfires, which, of course, as someone who loves the outdoors, I hate wildfires and I hate seeing it burn to place. But when you have wildfires, they're actually decreasing overall in terms of the number of fires, but the numbers of acreage that are burned are astronomically higher. They're skyrocketing to just crazy record levels. That means that we're doing something wrong. And what we're doing wrong is we're not managing our forests. We have replanted trees way too close together in places that shouldn't be that close together. They're basically like a tinderbox waiting to happen. We have refused to actively cut out dead brush and other things that might just flame up in the forest floor. And we basically created a setup for forest fires. It's like we're asking for forest fires. And when you have California's policy of don't touch the forests, they need to be left alone, then you're allowing all those horrible things to add up, and a lightning strike hits, or a gender reveal party goes wrong, or something like that. And we have some of the worst wildfires in American history happening year after year. And it's affecting air quality on the East Coast for wildfires that are happening 2,000 plus miles away. So we need, and by the way, that emits more carbon than 25 million cars on the road every single year. So we're basically undoing any progress that we're going to make. So it's really backwards that we're not prioritizing forest management.
Hugely important, and it sounds noble to never want to cut down a tree,
right.
But I think really it's such
the
a
Lorax.
Shallow argument, and I'm seeing that type of shallow facade of caring about the environment and then actually instituting horrible policies that are awful for it really across the board. Maybe the best example outside of forest management is in agriculture right now, with people pointing the finger at local farms and ranchers and trying to say that they are directly responsible for all of the carbon emissions in the world and they need to be regulated or shut down entirely. And yet the solutions that environmentalists are coming up for with stuff like this is lab-grown meat, which most scientists would actually say has a 25 times higher level of carbon emission output than your average meat farm in the agriculture industry. Talk to me about ag really quick, and why is farming and ranching so directly under attack by a lot of very well-renowned and arguably quite intelligent but very misguided climate scientists?
It's completely misguided, and we have the reality of a growing population worldwide that needs to be fed. And that population is going to be fed by farmers. It's not going to be these like cute little rooftop gardens in New York. Like, I'm sorry, it's not. Like, it's helpful.
Unless
but
you want to eat like a cherry tomato, maybe.
One cherry tomato a day, if you're lucky, in the summer. We need our nation's farmers. And one of the things that people don't understand on the climate side of the left about farmers in America is we're one of the only countries where our agriculture reduces more carbon than it emits. Our 12% of our 12% of emissions are reduced by the agricultural industry, but they only emit 10%. So they have a 2% sink. Carbon sink is what they call that. And so, like, yes, are there ways for them to be better? Yes. Are there more efficient practices? Yes. Are there new technologies? Absolutely. So I'm not trying to say that we can't be better, but to put the blame on them when they're the ones who are actually feeding us and reducing emissions at the same time is so inherently ignorant that it's hard to grapple with. And when we're one of the only countries that does that, similar to fossil fuels, where our fossil fuels are cleaner than other places, and they're not all the same, just like farming's not all the same across borders. When we're not meeting the demand for food in the United States, it's being supplied from somewhere else. And right now, a lot of that's Brazil. Brazil is cutting down the Amazon in crazy droves. They're allowing it to happen because of agriculture. And the agriculture there, because of the seasons, they can only do agriculture on the land that they clear cut for 1 to 2 years, and they have to ditch that property. So you're cutting down the Amazon for 1 to 2 years of crops and livestock and stuff like that, and then you're moving it somewhere else. I mean, and that's because we don't want to do it here in the United States because for some reason farmers here are bad. And the part about the lab-grown meat is so true. I mean, I grew up in a family of vegans, and I was a conservative vegan family, and I was the only meat eater in the family, and
I
still
never
am, by
knew
the
that
way.
about you.
Still
Oh
am,
my gosh.
yes. Uh, they aren't vegan because of environmental reasons. They actually just don't like meat for some reason. So they were like vegan before it was cool, or before it. Well, I think it's pretty uncool, but before. And sorry if my family's watching this. I don't think you're uncool. I just the trend is uncool,
Fair
um,
enough. Fair enough.
and it is so backwards how much water is used for these things too. Like you were talking about the carbon emissions, like that's definitely true. But like for almonds and soy and all these things, it's so
It's
bad. So
horrible.
when I tell people if they want to eat sustainably, I only sustainably thinking, okay, turkey and chicken are the best, and fish are the best thing you can do from a carbon emissions perspective and a water perspective. Those are the best thing. But also, people should be able to eat what they want to freaking eat. If my family wants to be vegan because they don't like meat, then great. And if I don't want to eat meat because I think it's gross, then fine. But I don't, so I'm gonna eat meat. So like, it's so yeah. All this is pretty backwards.
How do you think that the vegan movement really got tied in with being pro-environment? Just anecdotally, in your own experience.
I think it's because a lot of the hippie community ended up becoming vegan, and the hippie community kind of had that Greenpeace sort of
Yeah.
feel to it. Um, but you know, the CEO of Whole Foods, or sorry, the founder of Whole Foods, John Mackey, he's a vegan and he's a huge capitalist and a huge, believer in the principles that we're talking about. And so I think and he's so frustrated by the fact that the vegan movement is so inherently liberal. I think it's actually another good example of, but he also doesn't want to tell people what they can and can't do. And
Yeah.
that's the
I
difference.
I
It's
do see a
like
difference there. I feel like half of vegans out there are just like, let me do my own thing. The other half, or maybe a slight majority, are like, we
probably a
have to
majority.
ban food for everyone, or I'm going to not be able to sleep at night.
Right. I mean, I have friends and family members where, you know, meat is so appalling to them that they can't be around it. And
Wow.
and I think like it's kind of yeah, it's the difference between closed-minded and open-minded on it. And like if you're vilifying someone for what they're eating, you will never win that argument. You're going to push them further and further away from you. So if you want them to eat less meat, they're going to probably eat more meat. And that's what a lot of the environmental community doesn't understand is that when
Mm.
you push solutions down people's throats and you tell them what they can and can't do, they are going to do the opposite of that. I mean, I know so many conservatives that are like, yeah, sometimes I'm gonna go out of the house and I'm like, I honestly will pay the higher electric bill because leaving my lights on is gonna own the libs. And it's like I hate that mindset, but like when you're told that you're the villain and
Yeah.
you're gonna run the other way.
Hmm. That's a perfect segue into the Green New Deal. You've
Mm,
mentioned it once already, but outside of your book, even on the left, I don't see a lot of coherent policy solutions being put
no,
forward on the table for any of the environmental issues that we're dealing with from the right or the left. Really, the only comprehensive policy strategy that the left and the radical environmental movement has introduced over the last several years has been the Green New Deal. On the off chance someone's watching this that thinks, oh my gosh, that's like the best thing since sliced bread, we have to pass this or the world is literally going to end in 12 years. Really quick overview. What's wrong with the Green New Deal? Why is it the wrong solution? And is there a more rational, conservative side of some of those ideas that make a whole lot more sense for our country?
absolutely. And I think even if someone doesn't believe that, they probably know someone who does. And the Green New Deal not only would cost $93 trillion dollars to reduce emissions just 4% across the world, but it's also got 25% of its policy is focused on items that have nothing to do with climate change or the environment. Like literally
Oh,
nothing. Like absolutely nothing. And then well over 50%, uh, almost 60% is dedicated to just EVs and solar panels. So you're basically ignoring every other part of the solution. So you're A, ignoring every other energy source. You're B, ignoring every other transportation source, hybrids, internal combustion engines. You're ignoring farming. You're ignoring forests. You're ignoring uh, buildings and how efficient they are. Like you're ignoring a whole host of the problem. And that's that's why the Green New Deal doesn't make any sense, because not only is it a waste of money that doesn't make any impact, but it's also ignoring so many parts of the solution that we would need to achieve. We don't need to spend $93 trillion to achieve that, though. And like throwing money at a problem doesn't solve it. The private sector, despite our government's inability to talk about this because of the partisan divide, has continued to allow America to lead the world in emissions reductions. Our Congress and politics is broken right now. We have political leaders who do not care about us or actually care about the environment at all, and yet our environment's getting better because of the private sector. We don't need to spend $93 trillion in a Green New Deal to solve environmental challenges. We probably could use some helpful government policy every once in a while on it, but we don't need the Green New Deal, and the Green New Deal wouldn't work anyways.
I view the Green New Deal really the same way that I'm looking at all of these banned TikTok bills. It says it's trying to do something at the outset, but really it's kind of a Trojan horse for a massive government overhaul of society, be that censorship and the banned TikTok side of things and regulating the internet, but really just general industry and environmental policy in the Green New Deal. You mentioned that a massive chunk of this legislation actually has nothing to do with the environment. What is it about then? What is it proposing?
Social justice programs, free lunches in schools. It's got tons of education stuff. It's a lot of like race related, gender related things. Well, what's crazy though is that I honestly could get on board with the idea of supporting communities that have been hard-shipped around environmental issues, because environmental like waste plants and trash dumps and stuff are located more closely with low-income people, and low-income people can't afford expensive energy and all that stuff. But these policies make that worse. Like these policies increase the cost of energy for those people and the cost of food and make their lives harder. And so, of course, the poor Americans who are scared of this policy because like they're also scared of the environmental disasters in their areas. I think that was actually the last time I came on. We talked about kind of I think it was East Palestine, Ohio, that was like having the train derailment. Like no one really cares about poor communities, especially in rural areas, but the Green New Deal like spends 25% on like helping low income people, but only in urban communities, only Black communities, and only women. And if you look at it, it actually makes their lives worse. So that's what that money is going towards, and it's just a total waste. It was actually funny. I was speaking at the University of Chicago on Friday, and I called out AOC in my speech about how I think she should visit a community outside of New York or DC for once. And her chief of staff was there, and I didn't realize that.
No way.
Yeah. And he came up to me, and he was like, I just want to tell you that your message about how we need to work together fell on my deaf ears when you call out my boss for not visiting these communities. And I'm like, but she's the problem. Like, she's the exact problem, and she's actively harming the communities that you're telling me that I shouldn't have called you out on. And he said, well, she's been to those communities. And I'm like, really? Which ones? He's like, well, I'm from rural Minnesota. And I'm like, okay, but which ones has she been to? Like, where has she been? What farm has she toured? What fossil fuel community has she been at? I know she toured a nuclear plant a couple years ago, which was a big win. But like, other than that, like, what have you done? And he couldn't come up with anything. So it was a perfect example.
That's not just any staffer. That's her chief of staff telling you that?
Completely misguided. Yep. And it painted the exact problem. No wonder the Green New Deal is what it is.
I mean, truly, she is the perfect pinnacle example. She's the archetype of a coastal elitist that has absolutely no idea what's going on in the middle of the country, especially when it comes to agriculture and these fossil fuel communities. And so it was a nice segue into our meat is evil, we should get rid of it side of things into the Green New Deal, because I think the Green New Deal was so damaging, not just in how absolutely ludicrous its policies are, and theoretically, if it were to pass, how devastating it would be to our economy and the economy of the world at large, but really for how we have these conversations.
Oh,
Because all of a sudden, if you didn't support full-blown socialism,
yep.
essentially, and reparations programs and LGBTQ training in schools and whatever else you could possibly find in this. How long is the Green New Deal? Several thousand pages? I couldn't even give you a perfect estimate now, but
We read
incredibly
it.
long piece of legislation. I've read it many times. Then all of a sudden you hate the earth and you hate the environment
Right.
and you are contributing to the problem. You are the reason the world is going to implode in 12 years, which is ridiculous. So
We're halfway
especially
there
on the
on her
issue,
claim of that. We're 6 years into her 12 years.
so
So
somebody
time's
check us
ticking.
here. I mean, we're running out of good years left, especially on energy policy. I've seen such a 1 step forward, 12 steps back mentality because of the Green New Deal that people don't even realize that we are improving fossil fuel technology.
Right.
We are seeing the private sector innovate in really exciting new ways for green technology. And despite Congress's complete inability to even use the word nuclear, our generation is really pushing for nuclear energy. Can you give us from your book just a brief comprehensive overview into what's happening with energy policy right now? And if you were to see the conservative environmentalist come to life with the right policies for America, where would you want to see us go?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question. I'm actually going to quickly go back to your point on the Green New Deal because I think it's really important. The reason why we can't have this conversation largely is because the Green New Deal has taken such a hold over the narrative. Because it's given something
Yeah.
for Republicans to go so anti, and so it's given an excuse to not actually have to be for something. Because the Green New Deal is so bad that you should just be against it and pick it apart and go on TV and talk about it. And you actually don't need to come up with an alternative because there's enough content in going after the Green New Deal. And of course, the Green New Deal doesn't actually get anything done in the first place. So it's this
No.
really horrible. It has set us back substantially and made it way more political. It basically made what Al Gore did look like tiny, small potatoes. AOC took it to a whole new level, and she got a name ID out of it.
Quickly before we jump into energy policy, I love how you just said that. It gave us an excuse to be on defense. I was just complaining the other day to my fiance about how I feel like in the last 5 to 10 years, the Republican Party, the conservative movement, the right, whatever you want to call it, has been so used to operational mode on defense because we have
Right.
to be. Like they've shoved
Right.
us into this defensive position on gender, on abortion, on family, on marriage rates, on the food that we eat, on literally
Right.
everything. And of course, you should be defensive about those things. They're worth
Totally.
fighting for. But I
Totally.
fear that we've been operating defensively for so long, we've lost the memory of how to then switch modes and then go
Right.
back on offense. So I love that you just said that way. Because it's
Obamacare
a
was the
perfect
first
illustration.
example of that. Obamacare is the first example of that because we're like, Obamacare sucks, Obamacare sucks, Obamacare sucks, and then we got the keys to do whatever we wanted, and we're like,
What do I do?
yeah, and we're dealing with that on a whole host of issues, including climate. So, I mean, on that note, I mean, to your question about what we should do and what the landscape should look like, I would love to see our politicians pursue in what I call an any of the above energy agenda.
Hmm.
Any solution on energy that's more sustainable and that also lowers the cost of energy is worth pursuing. If that means making fossil fuels more efficient and cleaner, great. If that means small modular nuclear reactors, great. If that means geothermal energy, great. No one knows what the future of energy looks like. There could be new energy sources invented tomorrow. For some reason, we could figure out tidal energy, taking wave, energy from ocean waves. I mean, there's so many cool ideas. We don't know what that looks like. So let's stop picking winners and losers, first of all. Second of all, let's go back to conservation because conservation is a core ethos of not only the conservative movement, but also a core ethos of how our country has been so successful. Native tribes, our rural communities, our low-income communities in rural places are some of the best conservationists our country has, and yet we have completely forgotten them. And if we could be good stewards of our local environments, it would reduce emissions and help out our environment substantially. And we talked about forest management. That's just one example. The hunting and fishing community wants to restore coastlines, and they want to be part of that. And that would help against sea level rise and worsening storms and also reduce carbon at the same time. But they also haven't had someone reach their hand out to them and say, hey, we want you to be a part of the solution. We need I would love to see a world where we balance electric vehicles, hybrids, and internal combustion engines. I drive a hybrid. It gets 60 miles per gallon in my three-row SUV, and I absolutely love it. It's the best car I've ever had. And I think it's a perfect example of kind of this middle ground that needs to be found on transportation. And similar to energy, our elected officials should not be picking winners and losers. When the right hammers so heavily on EVs as being evil, they're wrong. And when the left focuses so heavily on EVs being the only solution that we should be pursuing, they're also wrong. So I think it's honestly, if my policy idea came into fruition, it's our politicians balancing all these realities at the same time, which is really hard to do. And especially in our toxic political culture. But also, I do believe in American exceptionalism, especially on this issue. I think that we do things I know that we do things in America for our environment better than anywhere else in the world. So we should be doing it here rather than everywhere else in the world. And that's a key pillar of the Conservative Environmentalist, the book, and my, policy ideas.
In our last couple of minutes, I would love for you to educate the people who are watching this right now on nuclear specifically, because I feel like no one really knows what we're talking about when we say we should be investing in nuclear energy. I didn't even realize it was as controversial as it was until I did the roundtable with ACC a few weeks ago in California, and we had our left-wing counterparts there at the event, and the moment the N-word, the nuclear word even came up, everyone's like,
I love that. It is kind
that.
of an N-word.
It's so controversial. We can't even say that. I didn't even realize that was as controversial as it was. Why have we demonized nuclear for so long while Europe and other parts of the world are successfully using this very, very clean source of energy? And do you see hope this November and moving forward with the work ACC is doing, lobbying members of Congress to make this more mainstream in American energy policy?
Yeah, there's a huge part of my book about nuclear just because of that. And, it's the safest and cleanest form of energy we have. It has the least amount of deaths per 100 people that work near it or that even just live near it out of any energy source. And so it's completely been vilified in the wrong way. But I similarly to kind of going back in history, there is a historical reasoning for this. In the 1980s, 70s and 80s, there were some pretty bad, nuclear disasters across the world. Not very many. There were like two or three. But, I mean, we learned about Chernobyl. There are a couple of others. And so it created this perception that nuclear was super unsafe. And the technology has gotten infinitely better. None of those things would even be possible today. Also, we've never had something like that happen in the United States to the level of like Fukushima or Chernobyl. And so, but we had these kind of people who, fear sells. And you had this small group of people who were like, you have a nuclear plant in your backyard and you're probably going to die from uranium radioactivity. And so people bought into that. People believed that. And people raised a lot of money and got a lot of attention to say those things. And so while the technology has gotten better and those safety measures have improved, and those are valid concerns to be aware of, but we have a reality now where that thought process is 40 years outdated, and it wasn't even really true for that time. But now you're having governors like Governor Newsom and Kathy Hochul in New York trying to shut down nuclear reactors. And those nuclear reactors are the equivalent. If you shut one down, you have to put up 3 million solar panels. Okay? 3 million solar panels takes up so much space. And it also wouldn't work, especially in New York where there's not much sun. So you'd even have to put more down on the ground. I mean, we are putting nuclear on the back burner and actually vilifying it at a time when we need it the most, because it provides 24/7 reliable, affordable, clean power. We've stopped building nuclear in the United States because of this very wrong narrative from decades ago. But thankfully, we have Republicans on board with nuclear as a climate solution and just as an energy solution. And now the left is starting to realize they can't reduce emissions without it. So at least the thoughtful people on the left. And there's been this huge renaissance of liberal leaders coming out and saying they support nuclear. So obviously if former President Trump gets elected, I hope that he prioritizes nuclear energy. America has led the world in nuclear power, but we're falling behind. China is building 40 new nuclear plants right now, and we should be keeping up our end of the bargain too.
You mentioned a presidential name there, and I know we're going over, but you're an old friend, so I feel entitled to your time. You
You are.
mentioned a former president's name there. How do you feel going into the November election? Do you feel like there is a candidate that's standing out that seems to be actually more pro-environment on a policy issue standpoint?
I think they all, between Robert F. Kennedy, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, all of their records in from the message and the facts laid out in the book, none of them are following the right path,
Mm,
and that is bad for the future of American energy policy and environmental policy. But I think former President Trump could have people around him, and hopefully he reaches out to a lot of our allies to say, okay, I want to take a more productive stance on this, because if he doesn't, he's going to lose a lot of young voters, and he's
yeah.
also going to be wrong because his hyper focus on kind of only removing the government and only focusing on fossil fuels is misguided. But so is Joe Biden's approach of vilifying fossil fuels, shutting them down in the United States, and increasing the size of government tenfold to quote unquote save the environment. So
Yeah.
I'm not feeling great about the 2024 presidential election from this issue perspective. Um, but I'm also an optimist that always believes that if they have a change of heart, you can always work with them. And I think that's something I'm always open to.
Well, and most people forget in the last President Trump term, they did a whole lot for conservation in particular, outside of just energy policy. The
Hmm.
Great American Outdoors Act was the largest modern investment into the National Park Service. I know lots of your allies were working with him on the Trillion Trees Initiative, which was very exciting. So lots of
Hmm.
good stuff was happening, and I'm hopeful we can pick up the torch. Benji, as a closing message for everybody watching this tonight, I think most people get so intimidated by energy and environmental policy because they think I'm not the president of the United States, I'm not a member of Congress, I'm not a climate scientist. Like, what could I as one individual do to do something meaningful for conservation? And especially on the right, where we don't have any of these conversations, you kind of just feel like you have to throw your hands up and there's nothing you as one person can do. How would you encourage someone to embrace conservation and environmentalism for themselves and to inspire the rest of their community to lead the way?
Well, first I would read my book, and then after that, I would fall. Think about where you've fallen in love with the environment, and use that as the passion for fighting for this issue. Then understand what are the issues that are happening to me locally or regionally, and how can I be pushing for our elected leaders to make the change, because they're only hearing from the alarmists or the people who don't think that these issues matter, whether that's
Yeah.
at the local level or the national level. That's all they're hearing from. So whether that's your congressman and telling them, congressman or woman, and you're trying to tell them that you want, coastal restoration policy because you live on the coast and you think that that's really important, or you're trying to work with your local mayor or city council on getting something set up to build a seawall. Get involved with something that's happening locally, and you can still advocate for it nationally. But these elected leaders do not hear rational voices on this issue. They only hear crazy voices. And then they look into how they can meet those crazy voices with policy, and they're like, actually, this is impossible. We can't do this. So nothing ends up happening. And so we need people to remember their love of the environment and to have them advocate for it in a way that makes sense for their communities. Stop focusing on the macro stuff. That's not where the 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 cookies are going to crumble in real life down at the local level, and we need that to happen.
In other words, take a hike, people. That's your homework from the stream today. Benji, the book is The Conservative Environmentalist: Common Sense Solutions for a Sustainable Future. Where can people pick up their copy, follow you on social media, and support your work at ACC?
Well, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere books are sold. I'm on social media at Benji Backer. ACC is at ACC_national or ACC.eco. And I just really am grateful for your partnership over the years. It's been wonderful to see you grow and to continue our friendship. And I know we see eye to eye on this issue and so many others. So we're going to keep pushing together. And thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, Benji. As you kick off your book tour today in New York, I'm talking to you on the tail end of mine. Any advice? Drink a whole lot of coffee. You're going to need it. And every time you sit on a 737 Boeing plane, just say a little extra prayer. It's A-okay. So proud of you, my friend, and very
Thank you.
excited
Proud
for
of
the
you
launch
too.
of your
Talk to you
book.
soon. Thank you.